Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I'm here with a very special guest, Mr. ART THIBERT, a professional comic book illustrator who has worked for Marvel and many other publishers. Say hello, Art.
Hey, what's up? Hello, Clownfish.
Yeah, say hello to the reef. So we're going to talk to Art about comic books and independent comics. That's a subject we really like to talk about here on occasion on Clownfish TV, and going to talk about his career and a pretty exciting project he has in the works right now on Indiegogo. Before we do that, we got to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. Stick around. We're going to talk with Mr. ART THIBERT. Thinking about printing your own comic books, graphic novel, or manga? We recommend our friends over at Print Ninja. We've been using Print Ninja as long as they've been printing comics, and both the quality and price is excellent. Mention Clownfish TV and get an additional 5% overrun of your book order quantity printed for free. For free! That's free books, people. Just mention this offer on the phone or in the additional information box on the quote request form. That's printninja.com, or click on the link in the description below. All right, welcome back. This is Neon here with ART THIBERT, and we're going to talk about comic books. You like comic books, Art?
Yes.
All right, so Art has been making comic books for a very long time, correct?
Yeah, 35 years. I think it'll be 36 years coming into the new year. Yeah, almost 36.
That's insane. So you've seen pretty much everything, right? I mean, you've seen kind of, the ups and downs of the industry.
Yeah, I remember when we used to have to drive to the post office and hand drop off pages, and we had to use their packaging. We had to use that brown paper and wrap it and have it all weighed and everything. So this all predates the internet and definitely predates Federal Express.
Oh my gosh. So tell me, and tell our listeners, could you give them sort of a nickel tour, I guess, of your career, how you got into comics, companies you've worked for? I know a lot of people probably remember you best from your run on XMen back in the 90s, and I'm a huge fan of 90s XMen, so thank you for that. And if you can tell folks how you broke into comics.
Well, I'm not cheap, so it's going to be more than a nickel. So
okay.
I'm thinking 25 cents.
Give us a 25-cent tour, Art.
Okay. So, so I always liked comic books. I never thought I would have a career in it. I met Jim Valentino and started working as his assistant on Normal Man. So these were all like Renegade Press. These were like indie books. And so then worked my way up to full-on inking over Jim Valentino. And so as most independent, creators, you would usually get upfront money, and then you'd be promised back end off profits. And usually those dollars would never come in. So both Jim and I decided that this wasn't really working. So I started putting more of a superhero portfolio together, and more Marvel DC oriented. So then I showed Jim Shooter at a convention. He said, come on down to New York. I took him seriously, and I went there. He really didn't have a position for me because I thought maybe bullpen or something like that.
Yeah.
And so then he eventually just said, his secretary came out and said, there is a job for you. And then she said, it's as an intern. I was like, well, how much does it pay? And they're like, interns don't get paid. I go, I have to live here. I have to make room on board.
Right.
So then she's like, well, I don't know what to say. So then a friend of mine, a California friend, I live in California, so I had to fly to the East Coast. And so a California friend of mine that I had broken off, I just kind of, how one thing leads to another, and you don't really hang out anymore. And it turns out he moved to New York, and he had been working in the comics industry. And so his name's Art Nichols. So it's always that one guy that is the third party that can get this one person together, make the connection between the two parties. And so he was it. So he said, I'm going down to DC. You want to share a cab? And I was like, sure. Nothing's happening here at Marvel. They don't want to use me. So I got in a cab and I went down to DC, and it was the direct opposite. Bob Greenberger opened my portfolio and said, "What do you want to do here?" He said, "You can work here." And I was like, "Yeah, cool." I said, "What's available?" And he said, "The Warlord." So I started penciling and inking the Warlord for DC. And then later that night, I got a call. Apparently, I did make an impression on an editor, Ralph Macchio over at Marvel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he hired me to do ink work on, I think they called it the Star line of comics. It was more like for young kids.
Yeah, like the Saturday morning cartoon type books, yeah.
Yeah, so I was doing the Inhumanoids. So I was inking Jose Delbo on the Inhumanoids. And just a cool side note, when I got home from New York, I had every Inhumanoids toy that was ever made on my doorstep.
Decompose is the best toy ever made.
That's the one where you put the person in his rib cage, right?
I drew him. Well, we have an animation channel too. And I was doing Inktober, cheating because I was using a tablet. But I was like, I'm gonna draw Decompose because this toy would never get made today.
Oh, no way!
Yeah, it's just a giant zombie corpse thing, and you put action figures inside of his rib cage. Nobody would greenlight that today.
Yeah, he's like a giant looking dinosaur, but he has no flesh. He's just bone, right? And then you open his rib cage are hinged, and then you can put any of the Inhumanoids in there and just like watch them decompose. Was it some kind of goo that came down on him or something?
I think you could put goo on him. I think because his skull looked kind of like the He-Man, like the slime pit. The Horde slime pit that would slime your action figures and ruin them forever. Yeah, I didn't like that when I was a kid. That was one of my favorite toys. But yeah, don't ever use it on Moss Man. It never comes out. But yeah, I love the Inhumanoids. So that's awesome. I didn't know you worked on that.
Yeah, so basically, I got work at DC and Marvel on the same day. One as a penciler and one as an inker. So people always say like, "Oh, you're penciling now or you're inking?" And it's like, yeah, I've always done both. Mostly inking most of the career, and it's primarily because I'm a lot faster, and you have to make a living. So if I can ink 2 to 1, then I can pretty much double my income every day. So that's why the inking thing.
Yes, people don't understand that. They're kind of like, well, why do some artists do more detailed work, and other artists don't? And it's also, you do have to, when you're freelance, you got deadlines. You do have to balance, efficiency, speed with, it looking good. And sometimes, you got to streamline things to get the book out.
Yeah, because you don't get paid an hourly. So if I spend 50 pages on a page or 15 hours on a page, it's not cost effective. But if I can spend 4 hours on a page, then all of a sudden it becomes decent money because it's not based on the hourly. You just get one set fee to do a page.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, I mean, this is kind of going off a tangent here, but I colored comics for years. I'm kind of wondering because there is sort of a trend now, I've seen with a lot of newer Marvel and DC comics, to kind of go back to the more flat colors. And, everybody's like, oh, this is a wonderful stylistic choice. And part of me is like, is it stylistic or is it just practical? Like, I can do this page in half as much time as it would take to, fully render this, get the same amount of money, right?
Right. And also, there's just not a lot of money in comics. So the faster you can do and the more simplified, I guess, style you have, then the better you can do. As long as it's popular and it's, people are buying it, because that's also the thing. If people don't like the style, then it doesn't matter if you're fast at it. You're just not going to work again.
Yeah. Well, it used to be the case. I'm not sure now. It seems like there's a lot of people that, they continue to work regardless of whether or not people like their work.
And they all work at Marvel. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I digress. But yeah, Marvel, let's talk about that. So you're working at DC, you're working over at Marvel. And of course, like I said, I think a lot of people remember you from the XMen books. That's certainly where I came across your name for the first time.
Yeah, so my big break was doing finishes over Dan Jurgens. So DC knew that I had pencil skills and ink skills. Mm-hmm. And so, I had just done a mini series called Time Master or Time Masters, which is what they based loosely the TV show on. So I did get a fat royalty check for that. So that was nice.
those were a thing back then, right? They're trying to, so these companies are trying to get rid of royalty checks now completely.
Well, it was a royalty check. Well, I'm not sure if they call it a royalty check, but it was because of the TV show.
Yeah,
so I guess a royalty. Yeah, because comic books have always had royalties, but getting the Hollywood royalty checks are even better.
Oh yeah. That's the big bucks. That's why everybody wants to go Hollywood now.
Yeah. So I did Time Masters, and I just finished that up, and it took me a long time to pencil that series. So well, who was it? It was Mike Carlin realized that I could do both, and he said, "How would you like to do finishes over Dan Jurgens? Since I know you like to pencil and you can finish this stuff up." So that's what I did. I just jumped right into Action Comics and started working with Dan.
Oh my God.
And I used to hang out at because I didn't really know what finishes were.
Yeah.
And so I used to hang out at the Chaykin Studios, Howard Chaykin
Yeah.
Studios. His room, well, my roommate was his co-writer, John Francis Moore.
Yeah.
And so they were working on American Flag. So I used to hang out in that studio all the time. And so I remember just asking, like, Howard, what do I do? He's like, you do whatever you want. And I'm like, what? He goes, you're the final say on the book, not the guy that does the breakdowns. I go, yeah, but it's Dan Jurgens. He goes, it doesn't matter. He said, you have the final say. So whatever you want to do, as long as it looks finished, that's fine. So apparently I was kind of developing a style that became kind of my signature. And also I do remember talking to J. Scott Campbell when I was working with him on Danger Girl. And he said, you know, that style that you used to work with, especially when you work with Art Adams on those XMen and that Fantastic Four run that you did. And I said, yeah. And he goes, where do you think I got my style from? Those little blue and all that little stylized kind of like liquidy kind of bloopy ends and stuff like that, and the dots and dashes. He said, I got that from you. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Because you don't realize sometimes because you work in a vacuum in your studio,
yeah.
you don't realize that you actually are impacting other artists and other people in the industry. And so that was a great compliment. And so while I was working on that, I already knew Jim Lee, and we hung out in Artist Alley in San Diego for the big San Diego Comic-Con. It wasn't that big at the time. It was just at the Civic Center. So it wasn't this big, huge convention at that time. And so we just became friends. And so apparently he was following my work on, Action Comics. And so he needed some help. Scott Williams needed help. And so Scott took a break on Uncanny because Jim was just starting the X-Men books. And so Jim asked me to come on. And so I just started inking Jim when Scott couldn't. And so then I don't know if you know, but like there's Scott Williams, there's Jim Lee, and there's Whilce Portacio. Yeah. And they all had Homage Studios. So they had like a little apartment in San Diego that they all worked, out of. And so I would hang out there, and then I had Hack Shack Studios. I lived in the South Bay in the LA beach areas, in Osa Beach. So we would just kind of hang out in each other's studios, and it was just like whoever needed help, we did. So if somebody needed backgrounds, then that's what we did. And we kind of just jammed on a lot of these books. And then when Whilce came in on the X books as well, then we had teams now. So I went from Jim to Whilce. And so then we started, working on X Factor, then Uncanny X-Men. And then Scott and Jim were working on Uncanny. And then the relaunch or the new numbering of just the X book, it was just called X-Men. And so that broke all kinds of sales records. Oh, yeah. And so Jim and Scott worked on that while Whilce and I did Uncanny. And then eventually Jim needed a break. So he needed somebody who could do finishes. So then I went over and started working on X-Men and doing finishes over Jim Lee. And then Scott went over and worked with Whilce on the Uncanny book. But at the time I was doing that, this is crazy. I look back and I can't believe I did this. I was still working on Action Comics doing finishes over Dan Jurgens, and I was doing the work on Art Adams on Fantastic Four, and I was also inking Walter Simonson, and I was working with Jim and Whilce. So I was doing 3 books a month, not just 3 books, but 3 books by those guys a month.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I mean, that's insane because it's like, I mean, they're all like, I mean, that's major leagues, right? I mean, you're working on like the top books.
Yeah, and all those books now, when you look back on them, they're iconic,
Yeah.
because I worked all the way up to the death of Superman. So the proposal of Lois and Clark, the
Mhm.
marriage of Lois and Clark, and then the death of, the whole Doomsday Countdown.
Yeah.
I was there as well while I was working with Jim
Oh man.
on.
That's a lot of work, but the paychecks were probably pretty good.
Oh, well, I had no idea what I was in for, because Jim kept saying, he's like, "Don't worry about the page rate. Don't worry about the page rate." I go, "Yeah, but my page rate's kind of low." He goes, "Wait till you get the royalties."
Yeah, well, I think his X-Men #1, if I am not mistaken, I think it's 8 million units sold, something like that.
Yeah, something like
I
that.
think it's
Yeah.
the top selling American comic ever. I think #2 was McFarlane's Spider-Man, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that's I mean, those are some major numbers. Major numbers.
Yeah, I still remember getting my first royalty check for one of the X books, and my girlfriend at the time, I eventually married her, Pamela, and she works as a writer
Mhm.
with me on the different projects, and
Oh,
she
cool.
edits the projects that I do. So kind of like you and Geeky,
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
She's definitely the boss. She's the
Yeah.
boss.
And yeah, so I remember taking her out to lunch, or no, it was dinner. And so we went to some fancy restaurant. She's like, "Why are we doing this?" And then I just showed her the check, because I hadn't cashed it yet, because I just got it. And she's like, "Holy crap."
Oh my god, it's it's so crazy because I grew up wanting to draw comics, and actually it's because of guys like you. I mean, it was guys that era, Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane, and and I was seeing these guys on morning television. I'm like, man, I can and I loved reading comics. I'm like, wait, I can do this for a living, and I can go be on TV. That's awesome, and that's what I wanted to do. And it's funny you mentioned Mike Carlin, because I actually have a Mike Carlin story. By the time I was ready to break into comics, the crash had happened. It was like 1999. What's that?
I said, "I'm sorry, man."
Oh, I'm sorry for the people who were already working in comics, but I got to, actually he called me up to hit, DC, and he was a very nice guy, very nice guy. We spent probably about 2 hours in his office talking about comics and stuff. And I said, "So you gonna give me a job or what?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, what do you mean no? I came up here, I had an interview. I was living in Pennsylvania at the time. I'm like, what do you mean no? He's like, I can't. He's like, there are guys like Art Adams that can't get work. And then he went over and he picked up some pages. It was from I can't remember, one of the Justice League events with everybody was an ape, because Art Adams likes to draw apes, so everybody was a monkey, and I forget what it was. He's like, when you can draw like this, he's like, come back and see me. But he's like, we just don't have time. We just don't have time to train young artists anymore. He's like, things are pretty bad. But I broke in a few years later, so that's not a big deal. But I'm just saying it was weird how we went from like that high, in the early 90s to like, just kind of went downhill in the late 90s, and then things came back, and now we're, yeah, I guess maybe I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, but it feels like we're kind of having another crash right now.
Yeah, I've been doing this long enough. And when I first broke in, they were talking about that comics wasn't going to be around much longer. So I think there's been at least two, major times since I've been doing this. People have talked about just the industry going away. And so the newest one is, doom and gloom on the industry. But the way I look at it, all magazines, all printed medium is kind of having a hard time now. So not just comic books. So I don't think this is, just a unique comic book problem. I think it's all periodicals.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think it's, I mean, look at it this way. It's like everything else is, I mean, look, you've got old newspapers. Newspapers have been around for 100+ years. Magazines have been around for 50 to 100+ years that are suddenly like, hey, we're running out of money, And in this case, you're kind of like asking people to go out of their way to buy $4 comic books at a comic book shop if you can find one. Yeah, it's gonna be harder in 2019 to do that,
Yeah. And I do think some of it is the comics industry. It's their own fault, because even when there was a lot of money in it, I remember, because I worked out of Rob Liefeld's Extreme Studios, which was right across the hall from Image Comics Central. And so I hung out with those guys all the time over at Image. And I remember talking to, Tony Libido and some of the other high ups there, and just like, shouldn't we start marketing out to the mainstream? Shouldn't we start trying to use some of this money and start trying to build a bigger audience? Because we're basically kind of multi-covering an event, because that's what was kind of happening at Image. So they were events and they were multi-covered, like comics, I guess variant covers. And so, they were like, well, no, everything's going good right now. Let's not rock the boat. And I'm thinking, well, the time to do these things is when you have the money and you have the success. The time to do it isn't when, you don't have any of these resources. And so it fell on deaf ears. And I know some people thought that that's what we should be doing, but it just never happened. And even as deep as, of pockets at Marvel, because Marvel is Disney and DC is Time Warner, they still don't really have an advertising budget for these books. So I don't know what they expected, if they just expected that people were going to never age out of comics, and that whatever they had at that moment in time that they convinced themselves was okay was always going to be there, without bringing new people in. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what I never understood either. It seemed like we had a divide. It seemed like the kids were being pushed more toward, graphic novels, via Scholastic and et cetera, whereas, the monthly books, seemed to just basically sell to the same audience that was buying books in the 90s, except now instead of being in their teens, they're in their 30s and 40s, And
it makes sense because the younger kids would have access to more of like, the bookstores than comic book shops. And really the only place you could get monthly books was comic shops, because more of the actual bookstores were carrying the trades.
Yeah, it's because it's hard to find a comic shop now. It's hard to find them. We had 2 in this town. They're both gone. I gotta drive 45 minutes if I want to go to a comic book shop. My kids, so we worked in comics for years. I don't think our kids have ever actually been in a straight up, maybe once or twice, a straight up comic book shop. Usually it's like a gaming store or something like that, and it's just definitely, it's definitely changed. The market's changed. I do feel like the industry just hasn't kept pace. They didn't realize where the new readers actually were until it was too late, like you said.
Yeah, but when I broke into this business, they knew where they were. Like, yeah. I don't know what happened. Does everybody put blinders on and just decide that wasn't going to be a problem? Because when I was, always the convention was that kids would come in around like 6 or 7 years old, and then they would stay till their early teens, or maybe around 15, 16, 17. And then they would age out, and then they would start reading more like, Edgar Rice Burroughs or Jules Verne's or something like more novel action adventure, if they still liked action adventure. And then they went on to, real books and things like that afterwards. But there was always kind of an 8 to 10 year period that you knew that you had a fan base. And then you would just kind of recycle into the next generation and so on and so on. But that was always understood. And then somewhere along the lines, they just forgot all that stuff and stopped trying to market to a new audience, or just realizing that there were going to be people that were going to age out.
Yeah, and it does seem like, I don't know. We could talk about this for hours, and maybe that's another conversation for another day. But it does seem like the speculator market, I think, played into that somewhat. I think when comics stopped being just straight up, cheap entertainment and became collectibles, it seemed like there was a shift there. But that's just my opinion. But okay, so let's talk about comics now. So what we're seeing, and I would start off with the doom and gloom. I got to start off with the doom and gloom, like, comics are broken. Well, okay, so comics aren't completely broken. The mainstream industry is having some issues right now. Smart creators are starting to put their eggs into other baskets. We're seeing a lot more people decide that they're going to go do their own thing rather than be have their careers subject to the whims of corporations that could frankly shutter the comic book publishers tomorrow. You know, they could just decide one day, yeah, we don't need Marvel or DC. We're done. We're out. It doesn't make sense. But there's still a lot of people who want to read comics and a lot of people that want to make them. So it seems like more and more people are finding a way to do that independently, yourself included. And I see you've got a project up on Indiegogo called Chrono Mechanics. What can you tell me about that?
Well, in a nutshell, it's like H.G. Wells meets the Looney Tunes. So it's
Okay.
it's a team of time traveling repairmen.
Okay.
So they're just like average Joes, knuckle busting average Joes. They go out and repair the big machine known as time. So think about the big machine as literally like a clockwork cosmic machine that regulates and keeps all timelines in check. So just imagine the chaos that would ensue if you didn't have such a machine. So it was built in the very cosmos and the very galaxy and the world in its inception. So it's a really old machine. So it breaks down quite a bit. So there was a company called Chrono Incorporated, I should say, and they were formed to hire people to go out and repair the machine. So they hire different people throughout time, and they come in, they assemble teams, and those teams go out to different timelines wherever the machine is broken, and they fix said machine. But you got to keep in mind, this machine is ginormous.
Yeah.
It's huge. So they go out and repair like just a piece of it, like say part of the cooling system or part of the electronics or whatever it is. Like I said, it's literally a nuts and bolts clockwork machine. So, you know, these guys are turning wrenches, they're hitting, you know, sledgehammers, or using power tools, you know, whatever it is that they can to repair, you know, the machine. So in a nutshell, that's basically Chrono Mechanics.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Kind of, it reminds me of, it kind of has like a steampunky vibe going here, I think, with all the gears and, yeah, it looks really cool. Looks really cool. Now, was this, did you do this through Image before? Was this a continuation of that series?
It's not necessarily a series. They're one shot. So this is another one shot.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
put out a one shot 48-page graphic novel through Image maybe 15 years ago. And so I did a serialized like 4 issues through a small publishing company called Alias.
Oh yeah,
And
I
so
remember them. Yeah.
yeah, so then it's laid dormant for probably another 10 years.
Okay.
And so I've always had these, you know, just like any other creative person, you have these ideas that just don't go away. So with this new paradigm or this new way of bringing comics directly to readers and comic book, you know, fans, I decided to dust, you know, Chrono Mechanics off and a new story.
Yeah, the art looks really cool. Looks very, very colorful. It really pops. Very nice. So I'm pulling up right now, if you're wondering. So so we're looking, so our viewers can see this. No, it looks really cool. I'm definitely gonna put a link to that in the description of the video. People can check that out. So where do you see comics going? Do you think? I mean, what advice would you give for somebody who, you know, wanted to break into comics today?
Well, there's 2 questions there. So where's comic books going? I have no idea. There are people that are very, very doom and gloom. I've been in the game long enough. Just before the big Image boom hit, people were talking about death of comic books. So I never say never. So it could still turn around. The only thing that's different this time out is just that printed medium is kind of also going away. So that is a bigger problem. However, like you said earlier, there are still people that want this content, and the comic books are a very unique medium. Some people go, well, how do you I had this conversation with so many people in the industry, and they say comic books can't compete with video games, they can't compete with cartoons, and they can't compete with, you know, XYZ. And I'm like, comic books have always competed against those things. Are you nuts? There's been radio. They competed against radio. They competed against, you know, movies. They competed against TV, you know, all these things. Video games are just the newest, you know, thing that they're going to compete against. But what people don't realize, and this is what more people need to talk about, is how unique of an experience reading a comic book is. Don't compare them to those things because they're not those things. They don't compete with those things because they're completely different. A comic book is somewhere between a novel and just a piece of artwork, where you can read the words and there's an image that will back up the words. And it still requires your imagination because it's not spoon-fed. It's not like an animated cartoon where there's, a cell, like a frame, where you get to see every action, played out. You have to use your imagination. Between those borders, between those panels is where your imagination comes in. So if you've done your job right, you've painted an image that will start, and then there'll be a pause between those two panels, and then there'll be a conclusion, or it'll continue that scene. But it's not like, it's not like a TV. It's not like movies, or it's not like cartoons. It's totally unique, and you still have to put yourself into it. It's interactive. You still have to engage with the content to get something out of it. It doesn't entertain you like a cartoon or a movie. You know what I mean? You have to invest time into it. You have to use your imagination still, even though there's images to help you, but you still have to be able to bring yourself into it. So I always say that it's a very, very unique medium. And I wish people would talk more about how unique it is versus like how you can't compete, with these other things. If the price is low enough on a comic book, and like you said earlier, where it's somewhat disposable, you can invest 20 minutes into it, 20 minutes, a half hour of your time. You paid maybe $2, $3. You get out, and then you move on to something else. And that's all they ever were meant to be anyway. They're not meant to be like scrutinized for hours and hours and hours. If you want to, that's fine. But it really is just kind of a disposable like art form. You read it and you move on to the next comic or your video game or whatever it is. So, and then what was the other question, why I'm doing this?
No, what advice would you give that might dovetail into it. What advice would you what advice would you give to someone who wanted to start making comics now in 2019? Because things have changed tremendously since you broke in.
I think it really depends on what you want out of it. So if you want to work for Marvel and DC, I say put a portfolio together for Marvel or DC or wherever you want to go, and then basically break down story. Tell a story. Don't do pinups. Tell a story. And I don't even know how because in the day you could mail them samples, or you could go to the publishing company itself, like you did with Mike Carlin. But I don't know how you do this now. Sometimes at conventions they have where you could have your portfolio reviewed and stuff like that. So you'll just have to figure out how how their system works to where you can send in samples. But if you want to work at Marvel or DC, work as close to the house style as you can, if there is even a house style. I think Marvel is mostly Tumblr like art.
It's cheaper.
Yeah. And yes, that is a slam. So take that, Marvel.
Well, yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think now it seems like, I think they've gotten rid of the submissions editors and everything. I think basically it feels like to me, now I don't know if this is 100% the case or not, but it feels like to me like you really have to kind of do your own thing first, and show that you can make comic books, and then they come to you if they're interested. I don't know. That just seems to be what I'm hearing more and more.
I always thought, like, if you were really, really good, they would hire you regardless. So if you're as good as, the average person at Marvel or DC, then you could probably go in and get a job. If you were under that, then I think it would be harder. And if you were above that, definitely, because those certain things where they say, oh, well, we don't have any books available, or we don't have that. They usually say that to people that aren't that good, or still have some time, to spend to hone their craft. But if you were really good, they would find a book for you. You know what I mean? Like they would make, you available to something, or a book available to you. As far as if you don't want to work for Marvel or DC, then I would do exactly what I'm doing, which is start working on your social media, build that up, and then get yourself a YouTube channel. And the reason the YouTube channel, I've tried it without YouTube, it doesn't work as well. Because if you're going to do a crowdfund book, you're going to blow through your Facebook contacts in the first week, or your Twitter, friends, and all that stuff. So those things are only going to take you so far. But the reason YouTube is invaluable is because it's a platform where you can entertain your fan base, you can build a fan base, and then if you're entertaining and charismatic enough, like you guys are on CLOWNFISH.
I don't know about that, but okay. But
hey, I listen every day, man.
Oh my God, that's cool. Well, thank you. Thank you.
You guys are usually 2 to 3 videos a day, right?
We've been cranking out a lot. Yeah, there's just too much to talk about. It's like, man, as soon as we think we're done for the day, we're like, somebody else said something stupid. We're on it.
Yeah, well, I'm there every day.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Shows, yeah, it's great stuff. But you guys have a certain banter. So, like, you guys have, you have your personalities, and you have, your shtick, and you go into that, and then the subject matter. So, people that like that are going to tune in every day, and so that's what you need to do. Because the market is changing.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do independent books, start, your YouTube channel, start talking. Try to, if you don't have a personality, try to develop one.
If you don't have a personality, you're not making comic books. You're done.
Well, you know what I mean?
You're done.
Because when I started doing this, like 8 months, a year ago, it was really tough. Because I was like, well, what do I say? Who do I, who am I? Like you start kind of discovering your voice and who you are and what you want to say and all those things. And that comes with time. Like even, Ethan Van Sciver, like his early stuff was a little rough. So you're just kind of trying on different things, trying on different, like shows. Like the way I look at, my YouTube is I have different shows. So I have Hacks Chat interview. I have Hacks Chat where I just hang out with somebody in the studio here. I have, Kiss Corner where we talk about Kiss, for an hour, like different shows. I also have Walt's Vault, which is where, we talk about, Disney stuff.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah. So, you have all these different things and usually you just bring in what interests you, and you talk about that. And hopefully, people start following you. And then you can start, parlaying that into, hey, I have a comic book, or hey, I got this, or I have that. And then you already have this platform of people that like you, that follow you. And then hopefully we'll start, buying your product.
Yeah, no, that seems to be more. I mean, social media is incredibly important. People don't understand what, whether it's YouTube or even, see a lot of people on Instagram, used to be Tumblr. We had a webcomic at one point in time, but you have to have that platform. People expect to go out and be able to crowdfund or, ask, anybody for any support, and nobody knows who they are, and they get discouraged. Like, well, I put my campaign up on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, nobody backed it. I'm like, it's because nobody knows who you are. It doesn't matter how good it is. Unfortunately, it's, you can have something that's absolutely amazing and you're not going to get the support because nobody knows who you are.
Exactly. That's why I was trying to say, if you don't have a personality, develop one, because the only voice that project is going to have is yours. And so the only chance that thing has is you. So not only did you create it and your voice is in the pages of the comic itself, but also into selling it. So YouTube, the reason it's good is because it does have the algorithms and it does have some of the problems inherent like some of the other platforms do. But I found what's great about it is that you can cross over platforms. Like I'm talking to you guys right now and that you were interacting with some of my tweets. So, like we started getting to know each other. And so these things happen organically on, social media and especially on YouTube. So the cool thing about this is none of us have an advertising budget. None of us have a department where we have unlimited amounts of money. But if I can come on CLOWNFISH TV or, I give you guys a shout out all the time.
Oh, thank
so
you.
give you guys a shout out, and so on and so on. Then by sharing my platform and other people sharing their platform, we can be our own advertising, budgets. Like we can advertise each other's projects and get eyes on those in a way that no one else can. And also we have an opportunity to interact in a way that Marvel and DC can't with their fan base. I can go directly to my fan base. I can develop my fan base. You know what I mean? I can tailor my product to what people want. And so this is a very unique time in comics evolution. I've never seen anything like this, and I say it all the time on my show that this is Image Comics in the 2000s. Mm-hmm. So this is changing history. I believe it in my heart of hearts that between the Indiegogo platform and YouTube, we are changing the paradigm. Marvel and DC cannot do this, you guys. They can't talk directly to people. They just can't do it. But we can. We can sell a personality. We can sell our books. We can sell, other ancillary things, calendars, statues, toys, whatever it is that time will hopefully allow us to develop.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's what I kind of feel now. It does feel almost like Image did back in the day. It feels very, the whole YouTube Indiegogo thing that's going on right now feels very punk to me. It feels like very much like another boom in independent creators. I mean, geez, and I just talked about this the other day. Spawn 300 beat Spider-Man #1.
Yes, that was awesome, man. I mean, congratulations, Todd. I love you.
How cool is that? Like most people, honestly, the average consumer has more or less forgotten about Spawn. And here we had this much, ballyhooed Spider-Man #1 written by a Hollywood guy. This was going to be a million seller Marvel, and it got trounced by an independent comic by Todd McFarlane, who really, helped kickstart this whole indie comics thing, back in the 90s with the Image. So to see McFarlane's, Spawn 300, slam down Spider-Man #1. I had a huge grin on my face when I saw that. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, this is epic. This is amazing that this has happened.
Didn't he set some kind of world record too?
I think so. I know the dollar amount was crazy. It was like 200 or 300,000 copies of Spawn 300, and it was like an $8 book or some craziness. I mean, it was expensive, but yeah, beat XMen, beat Spider-Man #1 by J.J. freaking Abrams. I mean, just like, you want to know if independent comics can ever compete toe to toe with, with Marvel and DC. Well, there you go.
Yeah. And the success that Doug TenNapel and Van Sciver and even boy Zach, like these guys are making
six figures.
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are viable platforms, you guys. This is like Image. The money's not quite as good as Image was, but it's viable in this market right now. This is incredible. This stuff excites me to be part of this, to be able, like I came in just as it was kind of developing. And so I feel just like with, Image is kind of like, we're kind of building something, and I don't see any reason why this cannot continue, because also with the sharing of the platforms, you have older guys sharing it with guys that are just breaking in. So, and then they're going to move up into a position where their subs are good on YouTube, and that their numbers, Indiegogo numbers are high. They're selling books, and then they can help the next generation come in, and so on and so on. And we're all doing this not by mandate, like corporate mandate or anything like that. We're doing this because we want to. Like, this is so different. There's no contract. There's no corporation saying we have to do this. We all understand that if we work together and we share our platforms, that we can build something unique. And I've never seen anything like this before in my 35 years in this industry. So I am really, really looking forward to where this is going to go.
That's good. I want to end on that note, because I don't want people to get all, bummed out about the state of the comic book industry, because there's always another way. And there are segments of the comic book industry, and there are creators who are doing very, very well, even if the mainstream, trips and falls on its face, which I think we're going to see happen here. But there are always going to be comics in some form, for sure. Definitely, as long as people want to make them and people want to read them. So, Art, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on all social media, so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The thing I'm mostly on is YouTube. So I try to have presence at least every day. I try to put some kind of show together, or even just, a chill stream where I'm just talking and hanging out with people in the live chat. So, so YouTube, definitely come by, sub if you like the content. And then, of course, I have Chrono Mechanics that is live right now on Indiegogo. So please check that out.
Okay, and I will put a link to that in the description. Art THIBERT, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right, guys, we will talk to you guys later. Goodbye. Hey, guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe. Ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.